All right. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, good evening.
Welcome back to the book of Revelation. If you got your Bible, you can open up to Revelation chapter 8. Last week, we finished up the 7 seals, and we also talked about the 144,000, the people sealed with God's mark, and the countless multitude. And if you missed that class, it's on YouTube, so you can look up, I think we formatted it, just Revelation Study,
Well,
and then a number dash my name.
no, I don't think you can find it that way. You just have to ask me for the link.
You told me about it.
Oh,
I'll call Lourdes in the morning, she'll find
okay.
it, or Risa.
But if you want the link, Catherine can get you the link. All right, so who wants to take this first chunk for us?
I shall.
This is
I am here.
Revelation 8, 6 through 11.
6 through 11.
Oh, by the way, your yes, your version probably has headers, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Don't read the headers.
Okay.
roger that.
There's the trumpets are short, so there's gonna be lots of headers. You don't need those.
So I'm gonna run into the header that I'm not gonna read, it's first trumpet.
Right.
Vegetarian struck.
Yep.
Vegetation struck. Okay, here we go. King James, New King James Version. So the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. And a third of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. Then the second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood. And a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Turn the page. Then the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the water because it was made bitter.
All right, thank you. All right, so we have the second set of 7. If you know an overview of Revelation, there's these 3 sets of 7. There's the 7 seals, which we already talked about. Now, the middle one is the 7 trumpets, and the last one is 7 bowls of God's wrath. So the second set of 7, and it's debated whether the sets are supposed to be in chronological order, or if they are sort of, they're talking about the same thing, the same events, or if the 7 trumpets, because they were sort of preluded during the 7th seal scene, if the 7 trumpets are the 7th seal. So it's like a debate of like different theories about what are the trumpet events, because we did like a halfway decent job of identifying what the seal events were. So what were the trumpet events? Are they a whole other thing of events that happens after the seals? Do they happen concurrently, or is it talking about the same thing, just like a different point of view? Or is it like within the last seal, the 7th seal? That's all a big debate. I just wanted to throw that out there, that debate is like a thing. And nobody really knows for sure. We're going to run into a lot of things in Revelation where we will have to say nobody really knows for sure. So the first trumpet, there was fire and hail falling on the earth. Hailstones are a very common image used for like divine judgment. Who knows the first instance where hailstones occur in the Bible?
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Not hailstones.
That's not hailstone?
Brimstone.
Joshua asked for help and wanted another hour to fight, and God joined the fight with fire and hail and brimstone.
I love that you know that. I love that you know that, but it's in between those two.
That's one of my favorite verses.
The book starts with an E,
Ezekiel.
not Ezekiel. Exodus.
Excellent.
In Exodus, during the 10 plagues, one of the plagues is hailstones. It's actually the only one aside from the last plague where God gives them a warning. He says, hey, God wants to test which one of your people, he's talking to Pharaoh, which one of your people are actually like secretly wanting to listen to him. So, and he talks to like all the nobles in the palace. He says, there's going to be a giant hailstorm and you need to bring all of your animals and your servants inside or they're all going to die. And some of them brought them inside and some of them left them outside. And the ones who left them outside, they all died. So it was like, I want to see, you know, Pharaoh, you're resistant to God. You're not going to listen to him. I want to see if any of your people are going to listen to him. And some of them did. So I found that interesting. But also, like John said, the hailstones in the book of Joshua, when he is fighting the
Something heights.
yeah, the Ammonites. I believe.
Ammonites, I was gonna
When he's
say.
fighting the Ammonites, he asks for a little bit more time so that they can finish the battle. So it's the day that the Lord holds the sun still. And I forget how long. he
An hour, I
holds
think
it
it was an
still.
hour.
It's like a few hours, I
Was it a
believe,
few hours?
like half a day or something like that. The specifics elude me, but it's mentioned that, you know, Israel was chasing the enemy as they ran and God was raining hail down on them and more of them died from the hail than actually died from the Israelites. So it was like God fighting a battle for his people. And that's what God using hail like means in the Bibles, comes to symbolize. It's a moment where God is like doing the fighting for his people. It being with fire draws an imagery like Sodom and Gomorrah, the fire raining down. Definitely making one think of a day of God's judgment, God's wrath against sin, against wickedness. However, a little detail is that it's been mixed with blood. Do we have any, let me see if anyone is an astute studier of Revelation. Where did this blood come from? What's this blood mean?
I heard a theory that it was the blood that came out of Jesus's body on the cross.
Okay,
Is that one of those questions
Random.
nobody will ever be sure?
no, you can get it.
Oh, okay.
Like the sacrificial blood.
Sacrificial blood. How about going back to actually the only time that blood so far has been mentioned in the book, and that is back in chapter 6 when the Lamb opened the 5th seal. John sees the dead martyrs underneath the altar, and the altar is dripping with their blood. Their blood. So the only blood imagery that's been brought up so far is the blood of the Christians who have been killed by the wicked people who dwell on the earth in the Revelation vision. And so we get this this very distinct impression or vibe that this judgment moment is specifically because these people have been killing God's people. That they have been sacrificing them on the altar of, maybe I won't go that far with the analogy, but the altar with the blood and they're underneath the altar. That kind of sacrificial image is there. and also the martyrdom image and God's vengeance is there. The third of the earth and the tree, by the way, the New King James Version didn't have this, but a third of the earth being burned up, that's a textual variant. I pulled the text from the ESV and they use it there. Don't worry too much about whether or not the version that you are reading or have in your lap has that. It's a textual variant. Some of the manuscripts don't have it, some of them do have it. That's why in some versions it's there, some versions. But a third of the earth burned up, the trees and the grass, a third of all of those things burned up. And that set of three things is the same three things that were brought up during the 144,000 people scene, where the angels are holding the four winds back, and they say, we're gonna hold these back so that the, forget exactly what they say, don't harm any of the grass or the trees. Let me see. Do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. I guess it doesn't mention grass, does it? Cool. So it's like that interlude from the seven seals scene with the 144,000 was them holding back this moment, something like that. Now this is when those things get burned up. It being a third, this got mentioned like way at the beginning. The third is using the, it's like a significant minority of a thing. So it's not an insignificant amount of the earth getting burned up, not an insignificant amount of the trees, but it's not like all of them. It's not all of the trees getting burned up, the whole world getting burned. It's a minority, but it's a significant minority. It could also be meaning that all the kinds of places in the world are experiencing this. So all the places are experiencing this sort of devastation event, but it's not completely destroying anything. People are living through this. Second angel blows his trumpet, says something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. There are a couple of theories about what John means by a great mountain burning with fire. Number one is it could be a description of a volcano. The word volcano did not exist until the eruption of Mount Vesuvius at Pompeii. That was in 71. So it was a short enough time before Revelation was written that the word volcano probably wasn't in everyone's vocabulary yet. So he describes a volcano. Another theory could be that it is an image from the book of Enoch. A mountain made of fire, or a mountain burning with fire, symbolizes in the book of Enoch the spiritual beings who are in rebellion against God. So it could be like the second trumpet blows, there's this spirit being who is like just thrown into the ocean. And the third of the sea becomes blood. There's only one place in the Bible where a body of water becomes blood, and that is the 10 plagues on Egypt. The first plague, the Nile became blood. And it specifically mentions that the marine life dies. A third of the living creatures in the sea died. A third of the ships also were destroyed. That's not in the book of Exodus. But that's it here. So it's probably, I say probably, it's not literally meaning the sea turns into blood. Here, in Exodus it did. But here it's drawing on that imagery, but the ships being like destroyed, how would that happen if the sea turns to blood. It's meaning that something having to do with like maritime sort of stuff. Lava, okay, maybe lava,
Volcano.
okay. But it's describing in this symbolic language, something happening that like maritime trade is just gonna absolutely break down.
Why are we assuming that it's not gonna be blood?
You said going to be,
Why it's not going to be actual blood?
not, okay. First, we'll have to address that Revelation isn't talking about things that are in our future.
I disagree, okay?
That's a discussion that is gonna eat up all of our time if we have it. I would say go check with me later or look in that note packet.
Ray has it.
The one that we have.
She probably doesn't have
I don't have
I mean,
Are there extra notes?
I can print one out for you.
Okay,
And there's a lot of it on that in there.
so this is all symbolic, is what you're saying, that's your opinion?
It's metaphors. Now, saying that it's metaphor doesn't mean that it doesn't correspond to for real events. It means that it's describing those events in a way that is not literal. Right? Which is why like you can say the theory that Great Mountain burning with fire could be either a description of a volcano as an image that is being used, or it could be pulling from the book of Enoch, spiritual being who is in rebellion against God, that image being used. It doesn't, there were no literal volcanoes being picked up off of the land and being tossed into the ocean in the 2nd century AD, and we know that it has to happen around that time because the beginning of the book says so. That it had to happen soon after it was written. Again, you can go to the notes packet or go to the video of the first class for this, and it has it in there. So a great star falling from heaven, burning up like a torch. I'll also point out this word fell in the original language. It's this tense that is not like just past tense. It's called the perfect tense. So it is a past action that has been completed that has a present effect. So it's a star having fallen. So it's like John isn't watching the star fall, the star has fallen already. That's an interesting detail, that the star has fallen from heaven, burning up like a torch. It fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. This is like the weird, not complying to logic dream language, because how can one star fall on a third of all the rivers in the world? That's like, did it like burst and scatter? So it's that kind of dream logic that isn't logical. But the name of the star is wormwood. Wormwood is a plant indigenous to Europe and Asia, specifically like the temperate zones. In ancient times, it was used in small doses as a very common medicine, specifically for like, let's say, feminine things. Okay, but in large doses, it was toxic. So if you gave someone a large dose of wormwood, you could get them seriously ill or even kill them. So third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it was made bitter. There's a word in Greek for poisonous, and it's not this word. This is the specific word for something being bitter. Once again, Where do you know in the Bible that water is talked about as being bitter?
But that sponge-like thing that was on a pole that they gave to Jesus.
That's wine.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Didn't they, no, hospit, what?
Vinegar wine.
It's
It's all Exodus.
Back in Exodus, after Israel leaves from Egypt, they go for 4 whole days and all of their water is run out and they're at this place that only has bitter water. So it's water that is not drinkable. Then at that juncture, God has Moses throw a log into the water and it turns the water sweet. Now, did it literally taste sweet? I don't know. I don't think so. I think that just means it turned it drinkable. If bitter means not drinkable, sweet, the opposite of bitter would mean drinkable, right? So it's drawing on another well-known passage in the Old Testament, the bitter water that Israel encountered on the way out of Exodus. And I mentioned at the end of like last class, or maybe like when everyone was heading out, that these trumpets are all going to be related to the plagues on Egypt, right? This specific one, it is not immediately apparent how it relates to the plagues, but if you actually go to the passage in Exodus, that is Exodus 15:26, Moses says, if you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes. He says, I will put none of the diseases, and that's the same word for plagues, on you, which I have brought on the Egyptians. For I am the Lord your healer. So it's again, relating it back to the plagues, albeit like through another layer, because God is saying, if you follow me, I will not put those plagues on you. Interesting. So not only is it bringing up the plagues again, but it's also bringing up this sort of exemption from the plagues that God's people get. And of course, the long and short of it is the water becomes toxic, people die because they drink it. Which, you know, if all the water where you live is toxic, you gotta drink something. Yes,
So basically what this is saying is there was a huge infestation of this plant in water, but it was originally a star that fell.
again, we're accidentally tending toward saying that this is like literally a star fell from the sky and poisoned the water. This is, they created a plant. This is using this metaphor to talk about really an event that I don't think we're able to identify what it was. And I mentioned before that that is going to happen a lot with Revelation, because with the passage of 2,000 years, a lot of the stuff gets lost. And we don't know everything that corresponds to what is brought up in Revelation. So it's not that like a star literally fell from heaven and generated plants that poison the water supply. But it is talking about an event in non-literal language that has some kind of effect that would correspond to this.
So what's the relation of wormwood to the plant?
Poison.
Oh, wormwood is the plant.
Right,
It's
so
a
like,
poisonous
why
plant.
that plant? Like, what
It's a
happened?
poisonous plant.
It's a poisonous
Right,
plant.
right.
And that's what made the water bitter. They used wormwood instead of poison, like you mentioned earlier. Well, if you give it large doses, it's actually a lethal poison.
Right.
So they put wormwood in there instead of using poison.
Well, you could use wormwood as poison.
Right.
Yeah, that's good.
As a symbol, you wanna use things that your audience understands, so.
Yeah.
If you wrote it today, using a symbol, you would say they put, or it became
cyanide.
Yeah, like something we know is
Well, I
poisonous,
guess
you'd
you
be
could
like,
use-
oh, now you can have on water.
Yeah.
So it's, the symbol is something that your audience would understand means something else.
Our 5-minute bell went off and I wanna get through these trumpets.
Good.
All right, I saw it.
I was just gonna say quickly that, one of the things that we have to consider is, and that we studied, for those of you who were not here. In the first class is that in the very first chapter of Revelation, in the first verse, it says that he sent. And signified it, meaning the book, by his angel to a servant John. So signified, it means that the book of Revelation it's been signified as in symbols, it's not literal. I just wanted that.
Yeah. He also mentions it's signifying things that would have to take place soon after.
Soon after, shortly come to pass.
That's why we're sticking to the interpretation that these events, like from our point of view, they have happened. They were in the future for John's point of view, but by now they have happened because they had to happen shortly after. yeah.
That's difficult to prove because there's so many times in the Bible where time spans, they weren't just a year or 6 months, it was like thousands or decades. So who's to say that they have already happened or are going to happen? Like, how are you proving this?
It has
That
to
it already
be, it has to be things that would happen in a timeline, a time frame that John's audience could reasonably consider soon.
But
Now,
why-
John doesn't believe that his audience were idiots. Like he knows they know what the word soon means,
Yeah,
right? If I told you,
but Jesus,
that-
Jesus said, I'm coming back soon, be ready. Has he come back yet? No, that was soon then too. So why are we assuming that this has already happened? Or that the whole part of it already happened?
I'm just gonna say this real quick, when you get to chapters 17, 18, and when we get to 13, even to 13, you will see some things a little more clear
Mhm.
that prove beyond reasonable doubt that things have come to pass already.
Yeah, but I don't disagree that some parts of it might have happened, but to say the entire thing, I don't think that's accurate. The whole part of Revelation happened, I don't think so.
As you get to the end of the book, it's gonna become more clear. I think, right?
yeah, it definitely does have things that are like identifiers. And the whole point of the book is that it's filled with identifiers. Some of them are like, they're veiled, right? They're veiled through this like almost code language that is being used. But like certain parts, like chapter 13, are really thinly veiled.
Yeah.
Like he's
Like-
stating things that he expects his readers to be able to connect the dots, like, oh, this is what he's talking about. Okay. The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them might be darkened, and a third of the day might not appear, and likewise the night. Then I looked and I heard an eagle crying with a loud voice as it flew directly overhead. Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth at the blast of the other trumpets that the three angels are about to blow. So here we get the, how to refer to them, the heavenly bodies, the sun, moon, the stars, all being darkened. Again, where did this come from? Where did this sort of event imagery come from?
Possible eclipse.
Where in the Bible did it come from? Yep.
Wow, where?
Ezekiel chapter 32 verses 7 and 8, that's one of them. Book of Joel also has that imagery.
Okay, yeah.
Chapter 2 verses 30 and 31. Joel 3:15.
The reference to Ezekiel, that's specifically about Egypt, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, so it's something going back to Egypt again. Well, when did Egypt have all of its light blotted out? is the, one of the 10 plagues, the 9th plague specifically. All of the lights in Egypt blotted out, darkened so that no light could appear, day or night. Meanwhile, whose light did work? The Hebrews, the Israelites, yeah. So we have another image being pulled from the 10 plagues, which was like the quintessential God judging a wicked nation moment. The 10 plagues on Egypt. Also simultaneously rescuing his people, right? Then John sees this eagle flying directly overhead. That word direct, this is a weird nerd thing. Directly overhead is a word that means the middle of the sky. So it's just like directly over, like the middle of your sky, directly overhead. And he is warning, woe to those who dwell on the earth at the blast of the other trumpets, the last 3 trumpets. So like these last 3 trumpets are really bad, really bad. And as we were going to see, pretty bad. So the 5th angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star having fallen. I did it correctly that time. Having fallen from heaven to earth, and he was given the key to the pit of the abyss. He opened the pit of the abyss, and from the pit rose smoke like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke from the pit, and then from the smoke came locusts on the earth. And they were given power like the power of scorpions of the earth. And they were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any green plant or any tree, but only those who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were granted to torment them for 5 months, but not to kill them. And their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it stings someone. And in those days, people will seek death, and they will not find it. They'll long to die, but death will flee from them. That they will seek death and they will not find it is from the book of Isaiah, I believe. Or maybe it was Jeremiah, talking about the siege of Jerusalem. People would long to die and that death wouldn't come because they would just be like sitting there. If you ever read about like the siege of Jerusalem in the book of Kings or the book of Jeremiah, it was like really bad. There was 7 years of the city being cut off and the food just dwindling. Awful time. People in that instance wanted to die and it just didn't happen. So John sees another star, like in the 3rd trumpet, falling down to earth. This star is given a key. In the book of Revelation, a key symbolizes that you have authority to open and close. In the beginning of the book, Jesus is, he refers to himself as having been given the keys to death and Hades. So he's received the authority to have the open and closing of death and the realm of death, Hades, right? So this star, and like this is the moment where you're like, oh yeah, the star is not just like a star, it's a being of some kind. It's an entity, a personal entity. This star is given the access of opening and closing. Says the pit of the abyss. I know some versions might say something like the bottomless pit or something like that. But the word is abyss, which is the word that the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, used to translate the word from the beginning of the Bible when it said that the earth was formless and void and darkness was on the face of the abyss. It is talking ancient cosmology like we did last time. The bottomless ocean kind of idea of there, like, there's just nothing down there. We got creation on top of it, the land, everybody can live on the land, and then there's like nothing. And that is where this is referring to. He opens the pit, smoke starts coming out like a furnace. That is something that happens in the book of Enoch, when Enoch is like spirited away to the abyss, and there's fire and there's smoke because there's the spiritual beings who are in rebellion against God, who are like just stuck in the abyss. And from that smoke, notice it doesn't say just from the abyss, it specifically says from the smoke, which is weird. Maybe it's meaning they emerge from the smoke, or maybe it's meaning they like materialize from the smoke. I'm not sure. But you know, John is just describing what he sees. So this is a description of what he saw, how he saw it. It's like they appeared from the smoke. Locusts. By the way, if you are referring to like a swarm of locusts, when I was little, I always said like a swarm of locusts, but it's actually locusts, which I don't know, it sounds weird to say it plural, but it's locusts. Where in the Bible do we get locusts?
I'm gonna take,
Aside from prophecy parts like Joel.
Egypt as well.
Egypt as well, yeah. You're catching on. Egypt as
again.
well. You got the 10 plagues, the locust swarm that is sent to just eat every plant. However, these locusts are told not to eat plants. They're anti-vegetarian locusts. Instead, they're told to specifically target people. So that should be a clue maybe that we're talking about something other than actual locusts. Can't, right? Now, when we get on to the description of these locusts, then we'll want to talk about the book of Joel, where like there's the locust swarm that's described in Joel, and they're described with very not locust description. We'll get to that, but these locusts target not everyone, but only who?
People do not see.
the unbelievers.
People who are not marked with
The
the
seal of
seal
God.
of God. Yes. So going back to chapter 7, we have God's angels going through the land, and they're sealing all of God's people on their foreheads. And of course, everyone who is not God's servants, not sealed on the foreheads, and they are subjected to
Annihilation.
Torment.
torment, yeah. We talked about the death thing. Okay. Who wants to read the appearance of the locust?
In appearance of the locusts were like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were what looked like crowns of gold. Their faces were like human faces, their hair like woman's hair, and their teeth like lion's teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the noise of their wings was like the noise of many chariots with horses rushing into battle. They have trails and stings like scorpions, and their power to hurt people for 5 months is in their tails. They have as king over them the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek, he is called Apollyon. The first woe has passed. Behold, 2 woes are still to come.
Right, pretty bad woe, right?
Mhm.
Pretty bad woe. So, this is what I mean by like, we get clues that, you know, we're not talking about just normal locusts here. They are described as if they are what?
The Roman Empire.
That's a very fast clear-cut interpretation. They are described, let's say more generally, they're described like an army, right? And specifically, the imagery being pulled is from the book of Joel, where he describes the Babylonian army using almost exactly these things. He doesn't mention crowns in Joel, and he doesn't mention the noise of their wings. But he does mention that they are arrayed like horses and chariots. He mentions that they have the heads of lions. So if you combine hair like women's and teeth like lions, you get the imagery of the lion with the mane, the long hair, right? And they're wearing breastplates, meaning like they are soldiers, right? Who else wears breastplates?
Roman Empire.
Yeah. I mean, who else other than soldiers, is what I mean. I guess priests wear breastplates, but we're definitely not talking about priests here. The scorpion tails are mentioned again, that the power to hurt people is in these tails that these crazy looking things have. And the fact that the imagery is all being pulled from the book of Joel, and nobody is saying that the book of Joel is talking about a literal swarm of locusts, because Joel doesn't give room for that interpretation. He like, in the latter half, not the latter half, in like, right before he describes the locusts, he says it's the armies of Babylon. So he doesn't give that interpretive room. It heavily implies that we're talking about an army, and that this army is going to come through and just make everyone's life awful. Yeah. Their king being the angel of the abyss, and his name is Abaddon in Hebrew and Apollyon in Greek. If you remember the city of Thyatira, you know that Y's in Greek names are pronounced like U's. So, who knows what these two words mean?
Destruction and destroyer.
Destruction, oh, they both mean destruction. Destruction. Or destroyer. One who destroys, right? Did you say that's dope?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty metal. Again, let's bring it back to the running theme for all of the trumpets. There is one plague where someone involved in it is referred to as the destroyer. Which plague was that?
Was it the last plague?
It was the last plague, yes. When God in Exodus chapter 12 is giving the Hebrews their instructions for the Passover, and the Passover would grant them protection from the plague coming through, God phrases it as, you put the blood on the doorpost, and I will stand in front of your door, and I will not allow the destroyer to come in. So the destroyer is like this figure that is carrying out this moment of God's terrible judgment, right? The woe.
Are we assuming that's like, one of his archangels? Didn't he have like some archangels?
Yeah,
that
some
were-
people call it angel of death, right?
Yeah.
Because, brings death.
Like the
This is the same figure that comes in at the end of the book of First Samuel. When David has his census because he's very, very proud of his army, and God sends an angel to administer a plague on Jerusalem because of the king's
Indiscretion of making a census.
yes, which is something that
And
God
he was-
said, you are not
Don't
allowed
do-
to do as the king.
And then
Oh,
he
that
had,
makes
he had three choices, and he took what he thought was the least devastating. I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, and if that was the least devastating, you know what
Whoa.
I'm saying? It would have been a pretty bad woe. So that figure, this figure, the one who is known as the destroyer, appears there too. Another moment of God administering judgment because of something that that a king was doing that was unjust, unlawful, sinful. The king in the book of Exodus that was doing the sinful thing is Pharaoh, right? Then in 2 Samuel, it is
King David.
King David. There's I think one other place in the Bible where it mentions an angel being sent to just administer death, and that is during not the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem, but the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem. Yeah, it happens twice. So the Assyrians, they take over Israel, they take all of like the northern kingdom of Israel, they take all the people away, and then they keep going south. They get all the way to Jerusalem. This is in the book of 2 Kings. They surround Jerusalem, they lay siege, and it's looking like it's going to be all over for King Hezekiah. But he turns to God, and he and Isaiah pray to God together. It's a very inspirational moment, and that night, God sends a single angel. And it's implied that we're getting like the same figure whose like job it is to administer this judgment. And 185,000 or somewhere in that ballpark, Assyrians don't wake up in the morning. And you know, the rest of the army wakes up and they find like a bunch of us are dead, and they pack up and they leave. So Jerusalem is saved. So those are the three instances that come to my mind from the Old Testament where an angelic figure is commissioned by God, you could say, to administer judgment and death on a massive scale. So that's likely what this is pulling on, this figure whose name is Destroyer, right? I don't know if it could be any more explicit than that, right? He's using the figure's name. I say name, but like
Title.
name, like title, yeah. Like how Christ is not Jesus's name, it's his title, but he can just be called the Christ.
Since he's the only one.
Yeah, because he's the only one. By the way, my general policy is the second bell rings, if you gotta go, totally cool. It did ring like 10 minutes ago, I think.
20 minutes.
20 minutes ago, woo! So, the sixth angel blows his trumpet. I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar before God. Altars in the ancient times. I say ancient times, there's like very few altars after the ancient time. But they would have horns on their four corners that would be specifically for tying the sacrifice down so that it doesn't slide off. Because it's very slick because there's a lot of blood. So you tie it down and you tie it to the four horns. So saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels who have been bound at the great river Euphrates. So the four angels who had been prepared for the hour, the day, the month, and the year were released to kill a third of mankind. So now we have people actually dying. The number of the
Oh, we got an actual location too.
yeah,
Euphrates.
yeah, the number of mounted troops was twice 10,000 times 10,000. If you want to do quick math, that's 200 million. 200 million. No army in the history of the world has done that. So I heard their number, he says. And this is how I saw the horses in my vision and those who rode on them. They wore breastplates the color of fire and of sapphire and of sulfur, red, blue, yellow, right? And the heads of the horses were like lions' heads, and fire and smoke and sulfur came out of their mouths. And by these three plagues, it says plagues, a third of mankind was killed by the fire and the smoke and the sulfur coming out of their mouth. For the power of the horses is in their mouths and in their tails. We get tails again. For their tails are like serpents with heads, and by means of them, they wound. So these four angels having been bound at the great river Euphrates. Pop quiz. What big nations in ancient times lived around the Euphrates?
Ancient.
Babylon.
Yeah,
Syria.
Babylon, Syria, another one.
Babylon.
Starts with a P.
Persia.
Persia, yeah. So we got a region that is associated with Babylon, Assyria, and Persia, not necessarily in that order.
So basically now, it would be in Syria, a little bit like Turkey-ish,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah, it would be like Turkey, Caspian
It's the big river.
Sea, it's the big river.
yeah,
It's the big river.
it's like
Iraq,
It's like
that
an
area.
Indo-European and
Yeah.
Mesopotamian river.
Yeah. Well, I don't,
Like in
it
that
doesn't go all the way.
It's like in the Middle East, basically.
Pretty much, yeah.
It goes up from Turkey to the Middle East.
Exactly. So we get that region that we have these big world empires that are featured in the Bible, that are associated with that region. And so these four angels being bound at that great river, it's bringing up to the astute Bible student's mind of these nations that were like, God gave it to them to just rampage through the world with their armies. And then it's just like, says these four angels, right? These four angels. And then it says, oh yeah, it's an army, right? The mounted troops. So it's like, by the way, we're still talking about an army.
But they're referring to them as an angel.
It's referring to these angels that are being released.
Right.
So it's these angels that have been like pre-purposed, or I should say who, because angels are persons, who have been pre-purposed for this very moment. Like it even goes down to like say, for the hour, the day, the month, and the year, for this moment, for this particular purpose. Like this is something that God has planned on. If you go back and you read the book of Habakkuk, the prophet Habakkuk was like really distraught because all of these wicked people seemed like they were like getting away with it and God was doing nothing. And he says, God, when are you going to do something about these people? God says, hey, Habakkuk, I have a plan. I'm going to raise up Babylon and they are going to take care of these people. And Habakkuk's like, how is that better? You know how bad Babylon is? They're worse than us. And God says, well, don't worry, because this is just a matter of me deciding that this is why Babylon is being raised up. They're for my purposes. They're going to come through with their army and they're going to take care of the wicked people in Israel. And then Babylon's going to get what's coming to them too. That's how the book of Habakkuk goes. God's message to him. So we like the imagery, the phrasing, it's all being brought up, especially the region, the Euphrates. And again, the army being described as cavalry, and that being you get what I'm saying. I found it interesting that it doesn't mention that people are being killed by like their swords or them trampling them, but it is this fire and smoke and sulfur that is, sulfur by the way is brimstone, like Sodom and Gomorrah, coming out of the horse's mouths. So it's like, that's cool, it's metal. So we're getting another image that's like an army, but we're also getting an image that's like something coming out of their mouths that is administering this judgment.
It's like Game of Thrones.
It's like Game of Thrones. I never watched Game of Thrones. I've been meaning to read it. It's all, I've heard that, I've heard that like seasons 5 through 7 are like not even good.
I think they made a movie about it.
No, they made a show. Anyway, for risk of talking about more Game of Thrones. The rest of mankind, oh, by the way, they kill what was it, a third of mankind, so again, it's,
Oh, 1/3 left. At this point,
Exactly.
So it's a third of it, so it's like.
another third.
I don't think we had a moment of a third of mankind being killed.
And the first part
Yes.
said a third.
Yeah.
Third of them died,
Third.
okay,
We got a third
so
left.
yes, you
Yeah.
could say we're down to a third,
You're down to a third.
or is it compound?
That's what I was.
Is it being like a compound fraction?
Oh.
So it's a third of the 2/3 left, I don't know.
Third of this.
So, so
Division.
it's a significant minority of the world population. The world being like the world in the scope of what Revelation is talking about, right? The rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues, what did they do? Or what did they not do?
Huh?
They did not repent. They did not repent of the works of their hands, nor give up worshiping demons and idols of gold and silver and bronze and stone and wood, which cannot see or hear or walk. Not being able to see or hear or walk is like the way that the prophets describe idols. A couple of times.
Could that be a way of saying that they weren't real, they're not real?
Yeah, exactly. They're not real. When the riot started in Ephesus, when Paul was preaching in Ephesus in the book of Acts, the reason why it started is because Paul was teaching them that idols are not really gods. They're not really gods. When he's talking to the Corinthians in, I want to say it's 1 Corinthians, but I might be wrong. It might be the second. When he's talking to them about eating food that has been offered to an idol, which was like, where do you get your meat? Oh, I get it from the temple, because that's like where they have the meat. When he's talking about eating the food that has been offered to idols, he mentions, we know that there is only one God, namely the Lord. But, but there are many who are called lords. There are many who are like,
Many would.
many what exactly? Like the Bible never asserts that God is the only spiritual being in existence. The Bible asserts that there are like that, yeah. There are the beings who are subordinate to God, and there are also the beings who are supposed to be subordinate to God,
There we
but
go.
they're deciding to not be.
Right.
And so Paul says, we know that there is only one actual God, like the Lord, the creator of all and supreme God of everything. But we also know that there are these other beings. And we know the idols are not really gods, but you should also be careful to not be like getting mixed up in things that are going to like potentially have you bowing down to these other beings that you know exist and you know you're not supposed to be bowing down. So that is like, that's why it says worshiping demons. By the way, the word for demons or daemonion is the Greek word for, like Tori said, lesser god, lesser gods. It's the same word that was used for demigods, like Hercules or Perseus. That's why in daemonion you have daemonion.
And those stem from the Nephilim.
Good eye, the stem from the Nephilim. We're getting into the deep Bible layer here with the Nephilim. So here we have, the rest of mankind that didn't die from these plagues, lucky them, but they refused to repent still. This is something that, we see it over and over again. Something horrible can happen that should bring people like a moment of really sober reflection. And then they decide, nah, I'll just keep going the way I will. Sometimes when we are speaking to worldly people, we tend to be surprised when they act worldly. You shouldn't be surprised. That's like they're living in worldliness. They're gonna act worldly. You shouldn't be surprised when that happens. All right. And as Monty Python would say, and now for something completely different. We get the interlude. The seals, the 7 seals had an interlude. The 7 trumpets get an interlude as well. The 7 trumpets interlude is a bit longer. I don't know. What do you guys think? Should we hold off till next week to talk about this one?
Yeah.
I do like talking for a really long time about the Bible,
Okay,
so
who wants to go until midnight?
Not tonight.
I don't think my wife would like me to go until
I have a question.
midnight. Yes, sir.
Okay, so going back to earlier, you said you thought this stuff happened already. When do you think it happened?
Oh. Let's see. Going all in, oh. There we go. Here's the very first verse of the book. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show to his servants the things that must happen soon. He signified it by sending his angel to his servant John, who testified going on as much as he saw. Revelation 1, verse 1, and then the other underlined portion, Revelation 1, verse 3. The time is near.
Okay.
A lot of people bring up the, like you brought up, Jesus said, I am coming soon, and then it's like, he hasn't come yet. A lot of people bring that up. A lot of people also bring up, like in 2 Peter, with God, 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is 1 day, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of overlooking the fact that John is talking to real people who are going to really be experiencing these things. Like Jesus talks about in like really clear terms. Where is it? Revelation 2, there we go. He talks about like in really, really clear terms that some of these people are going to be thrown into prison. And some of them are going to die. Like, no uncertain terms, he's talking about things that these people are going to be going through.
He's writing specifically to the 7 churches.
Yes,
He's writing to them. This will happen soon. He's not talking about something like Christ coming sometime, and it could be tomorrow or in
yeah, he's not
2,000
talking
years.
like the remote future.
He's talking to the
about
people
something
of that
was
day.
Going to happen to these people.
But when I read it, my understanding is that he's writing to these churches because they are the living church of that time. But just like the letters to the churches that we still read today, they still apply to us. So why, I'm just not in agreement that it has already happened, because it's like, what's the point of it being in our Bible today?
What's the
Like-
point of any of the epistles?
Like, but where are we going with this study?
Uh-huh.
You know, like, okay, Revelation, it's the completion of the plan, it's the like prologue to Judgment Day. So if it already happened, are we in purgatory? Like, what's the point of us being here if it's already happened?
There are a whole lot of things that you're bringing to this book that I'm detecting. A whole lot. what John says in the very beginning of the book is putting us into an interpretive box. That's how I like to refer to it. An interpretive box. That one, it's signified, meaning shown in signs, it's symbolic stuff. And two, it's things that would happen soon after he wrote or soon after it was originally delivered. You could like say either of those two things, but those two moments are close enough that it essentially is. As I already said, he's putting it into this interpretive box where the timeline has to be something that these 7 churches in Asia, this original audience, could conceivably think of as soon. And moments in the future being talked about in terms that people confuse to mean the remote future is not unheard of in the Bible. If you go to Matthew 24 and 25, Jesus talks about when Jerusalem would be destroyed, and he talks about it in terms that confuses people sometimes. He talks about it using the phrase, when the Son of Man comes. When the Son of Man comes, like, what does that sound like? It sounds like the second coming, like the Advent, right? I guess the second, first Advent, when he was born. But he is for sure talking about when Jerusalem was destroyed. Because that's what the apostles were asking him about. So he gives them their answer. When is this temple going to be destroyed? What are the signs leading up to that moment? And he gives he gives them signs. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation that Daniel was talking about set up in the temple, you know that it's about to happen. The temple is about to be destroyed. And we know exactly what he was talking about. The emperor had his image set up in the temple, and it sparked a riot that grew into a revolt that Rome cracked down on, and the temple was destroyed.
Can I ask you, okay, cause I understand that your perspective on this symbolism. So, in your opinion, what do you think the true end times are gonna be like? Like when Jesus comes back, do you think it's just gonna be like a second? Do you think there's gonna be any more trial and tribulation that's described in this book? Like, I'm just trying to understand your perspective, because our perspectives are really different.
Well, going back to Matthew 24 and 25, Jesus talks about like that moment in time when the temple was going to be destroyed. And then he addresses another thing that they asked about. And they ask, and what will be the signs of the end of the age? In other words, what will be the signs of the big end comes, right? And Jesus says, of that day and hour, no one knows when it will happen, not even me. Only the Father in heaven knows. And he says, and it's going to be like the days of Noah. People were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were giving their daughters away in marriage. It was like business as usual. Nothing remarkable was happening. And then all of a sudden, boom, there it is. And he says, there will be 2 guys in the field, and all of a sudden, one of them will be swept away and the other will still be there. And there will be 2 women grinding at the mill, and all of a sudden, one of them will be swept away and the other will still be there. We talked about at the in the like first or second class that I talked about how a lot of people interpret that as like the person being taken away is the righteous person, like raptured, when in fact Jesus just referred to the flood and all of the wicked people getting swept away. And then he says, the 2 people, one of them gets swept away, the one who remains is the righteous person. So there's not gonna be any signs. There's not gonna be anything that you're gonna look at and say, Jesus is about to come back. It's not gonna work like that. And again, it puts us into an interpretive box. Even like interpreting world events that are happening right now, you're not gonna be able to look at any world events and say, it's the end times. Because Jesus hasn't left that open for you. Jesus hasn't left it open for you to interpret things like that. And I say specifically him because one, he said it, and two, I'm not saying it, he's saying it. Jesus, the person, our Lord, our Savior, who we follow and we seek to obey him without reservation. He said it.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say real quick that he says that he's gonna come in the twinkle of an eye, like a thief in the night.
Yeah.
If we were gonna see signs leading up to that point, that's not a surprise. It's
Right,
not
exactly.
the twinkle of an eye. It's not like a thief in the night.
That's why.
That's how I look.
That's why
how I look at it.
when the apostles talk about Jesus coming soon. You are able to interpret that differently than John saying that these things are happening soon. Because when Jesus specifically said, one, no signs. Two, you don't know when it's gonna happen. So the apostles are talking about Jesus' return as happening soon because it could happen right now.
Yeah.
And like, and so it's being ready.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. That's exactly the big message in Revelation to me is be ready. That's the biggest message in that old book.
Yeah, and by the time we get to the end of Revelation, if we ever get to the end of Revelation, you're going to know what it means. You're going to know like, okay, so if this all has happened before, that it's applying it specifically to the context of these people at this time, what is the message for us, you know? You're gonna understand, you're gonna know, it's like the events are specific, but the impact is universal. The impact being like, what does this book tell you about God and about the world, about what's really happening, about how he interacts with it, about like who is actually in control here? Are we in a pitched battle between the forces of God and the forces of Satan, and the actual sovereignty of the world is up for grabs? No, we're not. No one is ever going to beat God. That's the point of the book of Revelation, and it'll go on to elaborate that in detail.